So welcome all to a Writer's Morning Out, a free gathering of writers of all levels and all genres. For those of you who might have read the small print, the slush pile is not today, but the next one will be October 18th. The North Carolina Writers Network Summer Squire Workshop is in Davison on July 24th to 27th. I encourage everybody to look into it. The link is in the chat. In 2007, I applied to the Squire Workshop with my best 1,500 words of the whole 10 pages I had written. I was accepted and given the scholarship I needed to attend. I knew what I had was not fiction, nor was it poetry. So I signed up for the CNF workshop. I had no idea what CNF meant. Luckily, Sebastian did. He was the leader. Because of his faith in me, in my writing, my life changed forever. I probably would not have joined this writing group and participated in the way I have had it not been for Sebastian's early mentorship. Sebastian is a writer, a writing coach, a workshop leader living in Asheville, North Carolina. His latest book, The Patient Body, A Personal Narrative in Pieces, is out from Wren Hen Press this year. Reading it, I'm dipped ever so briefly into slices of Sebastian's life from teenager through to now. Beautiful, gracious, painful, provoking in turn. He has authored 3 books of poems and 2 other books of personal narrative. He commented also on photographs of Charles Weeks in Travelogue, and if you have an interest in photography, you'll want to check out this book also. His recent work has appeared in Orion, Lit Hub, Los Angeles Book of Review of Books. He is working on a book on writing called Cut for the Dog, The Art and Craft of Personal Narrative. I encourage you to check out his newsletter, Stolen Moments, on Substack, and visit his website. I have both of the links in chat. So welcome, Sebastian.
Thank you, Carol. That's a nice introduction. I appreciate it. 2007, it's hard to believe it was that long ago.
I know. When I went back and looked, it was like,
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, you can tell I'm a personal narrative writer. I start with too much information. My family was in a big car wreck the next year after that, head-on collision, actually, that took a couple of years to recover from. Took many years to recover from, but the first 2 years were the hardest. It erased a lot of what happened in my mind from the couple of years before the accident.
wow.
So it took me a while to remember our time working together, which is kind of, maybe apropos for what you were writing about, because I didn't have a head injury diagnosed. Everything else was broken, but not my head. But I think it was definitely something that both my wife and I had concussions to deal with, whiplash, whatever it was. So when we've got together recently, I've worked to kind of piece together some what we did back then. So anyway, like that when we met and worked together, it was at a writers conference for the Writers Network?
Yeah, it was at Peace College in Raleigh. And it was
Yeah, I barely remember.
it was 5 days during the week.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Evie Shockley was there too.
Evie Shockley was there, and Carol Henderson and her husband.
Yeah, Evie and I became friends there. I met her husband there as well. Yeah, I remember that. I drove off from there and straight in. I went across the country after we left. That was a fun time. See, right there. It was barely in my memory. Nothing personal, just something.
No. I understand.
So I have some things I can talk about. I'm really open to any questions as well. I can have you guys steer what we do here, or I can steer it, some combination of the two. As you mentioned, I've written poems most of my life. I write fiction as well. Actually, my MFA was in fiction, and I think, like you, I didn't know much about creative nonfiction when I was writing. This was, back in the day, and I didn't know there was a genre that you could call that was that, that was called that. And my program didn't have, like many programs, there was just fiction or non-fiction or poetry, nothing in between. And it wasn't really till I was done with the MFA that I was free to kind of say, wait a second, I'm writing a memoir here, or a personal essay, and so I've moved between all three genres pretty easily. I see myself as a hybrid writer. So if you're interested in hybridity, it's something I love talking about, kind of mixing different forms, bringing in other art forms, collaborating with other artists or writers, creating something that is a bit of a um, Frankenstein, pieced together. So maybe we can start by you guys telling me, and when you were done, I can tell you about my project that I'm working on. Um, but tell me what you're working on, or what your interests are, and kind of what you're sharing with this group recently. And so I'm just going to say, Julie, how about you?
Hi, I'm just finished a novel, and it's told from a lot of different points of view. It's about a woman whose daughter has disappeared on her 18th birthday, and years later they find her bones in the desert. So it's really more about the effects this death has on, her, her ex-husband, her children, and then there's another woman involved who thinks she knows who killed both their daughters. So, and it's there's a transcript from a TV show, there's a police interview. So it's kind of, we've got a lot of hybrid forms. I mean, I don't have a chapter that says my mother is a fish, but but it has those other kinds of, different viewpoints. And so I finished that. So I'm both going back to a novel I started but didn't know what to do with earlier. And I'm also trying to revise, update, modernize a book of short stories.
Revive,
Huh?
revive, blow air back into. Um,
Yeah, so I don't know if that describes everything,
yeah.
but
Have you read Russell Banks's The Sweet Hereafter?
I can't remember if I read that one. I loved Empire Falls.
Yeah, this one, Sweet Hereafter, is told in five or six different voices
I'll look for
about
that.
a school bus accident where the bus driver and most of the kids died on it's a true story that he took, and he told the story from kind of Rashomon effect.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I've liked a lot of the Russell Banks I've read, but I don't think I have. If I read that one, I don't remember it. So I think I probably would remember it.
Well, it just relates to what you're working on. That
Yeah.
sounds interesting. They all sound interesting.
Oh.
Tom, how about you, Tom? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, glad to be part of this discussion. Touches on a whole bunch of things I have questions about. So
Good.
anyway, and I don't know what kind of writer I am. I do poetry, been doing that for a long time. I got an MFA in poetry. So there is a big pile of information, but I'm not sure I can always use it to come up with a poem that I like. But anyhow, it's interesting. And I'm very glad that I put the time into that line of study. That said, I'm currently working on a long memoir of the 16 years I lived in Japan.
Hmm.
And that, in a way, is my central major project for these days that I really am determined to finish up. And I'm getting close to the end of, uh, well, of course, revisions are looming, but anyway, so I'm just glad to see the horizon on that project. And other than that, I just wanted to say real quickly that in my poetry, I write narrative very definitely. And it is poetry because I have tried to transfer my poems into flash fiction or short fiction because they're less than a page. And I find that really, really difficult. And I'm just very curious to find out what techniques might be useful for flash fiction, short fiction, and just to better appreciate the process that might be involved in that kind of focus.
Yeah.
Anyhow,
Yeah. Good. Interesting. I want to talk about a couple different things when we get to it, but I don't write, I've never written flash fiction, but I've really basically been writing flash creative nonfiction now for 4 or 5 years. If I don't call it that, but I call them shorties. But I can talk to you about some of my thoughts and ideas about working in that, form, and it might translate. Yeah. Well, good.
great, great.
Judith, we'll get back to we can open all of this up.
um, I write all over the place. I've published several novels. I have two in just the very final stages of being proofread and polished up to go to agents, and that's exciting. I was a closet poet for decades, and I came out recently, published my first chapbook several years ago, and have gathered all my poems together and have half a dozen potential chapbooks that need to be polished and put together. And then, and this fits in with what we're talking about here, I found a memoir type story that I had, the piece that I had written when I was cleaning out my mother's house and finding treasures and trash and all of the rest. And I had done it in a fit of anger about something that I couldn't save. And Tom and Carol are coaching me to make it cohesive and coherent. And Carol has suggested, and Tom agrees, that I could turn it into a hybrid thing as well. I've got poems I'm very attached to that I've written from that period of my life when I was a child and saw all these things that I had to manage. And they suggested that I interweave some poems with the prose. I've just started thinking about it.
I like that idea very much.
Yeah.
It's the traditional Japanese form of the haibun or haibun, which is often a travelogue, but it's a mixture of prose and haiku, and it's often a passage from that travel. And then it's almost like a musical. Then you kind of break into a haiku. Into a song.
What's that word?
Haibun, Haibun, or haibun, and it's a nice balance of the two. There's a famous one by Basho. It gets translated differently in terms of the title, but Narrow Road to the North or Narrow Road to the Interior. And it's really beautiful. And I think there's a way to look at that and take it and do something more contemporary. It doesn't have to be haiku. It doesn't have to be a travelogue.
Right. And if I add just one more thing, I started exercise classes at the local senior center a few months ago. Good. And it's wonderful, just wonderful. And as soon as they found out that I'm a writer, they started telling me, well, we're thinking we want to have a writers club. And actually I have a course that I want to teach there, and they want me to teach, but they want to start the club first. And the manager and I have been exchanging brainstorming ideas.
Right.
She gave me she found a list of some that just knocked my socks off, just got it this week. But I'm reading 20 questions per category, and wanted to answer every one of them. They were just so rich as prompts. So
cool.
A lot going on.
Well, good. Sounds like way too much.
Well, yeah, that too.
I have way too much going on at all times.
Yep.
Bonnie?
Oh, well, I write historical fiction, It's a series of novels that take a single main character whom we meet when she's 3 years old in 1913, and it'll end in the mid 1950s. I haven't got there except for outlines and ideas. But I'm just about ready to publish the prequel in volume 1 anyway, and the others will come out sequentially sometime in the future. And I have in volume 1, there's a number of points of view, and one of them is a crazy woman, but she's a crypto psychotic. So everybody thinks that she's sane, except that we get to read her journals, and we know she's out of her mind.
What's that crypto? What is that?
Yeah, the main character makes up that term.
Oh, okay. I like it.
Most people can't tell that she's insane, but she is psychotic.
I think a lot of us feel that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious if the historical novel or the main character or characters come out of any real people, or is it a fully kind of imagined universe? Or somewhere in between?
Yeah, somewhere in between. There's characters from history who do make appearances. APG Anini has a speaking part. He's the guy who he didn't start the Bank of America, but he pretty much developed it and made it a real thing. And my characters interact with him. And Joe, what's his name? The baseball player.
I was going to say DiMaggio.
Thank you.
I literally
Joe
was going to say
DiMaggio
DiMaggio out of the blue.
comes on, but he's a very shy guy. He doesn't say anything, but he has a lot of fictional relatives who have a big part to play in their novel.
Nice. I love that you have a character come in who's from, real life, who's shy, so doesn't really speak. That's kind of cool.
Well, that's typical of that character in real life, except when he was pushing Mr. Coffee machines and he had a script to work from.
And when you get paid, you speak up.
Yeah, he must have figured it that way.
Well, that's pretty cynical of me. Carol, do you want to? How about you?
I finished the memoir, and I'm working now on trying to figure out ways to build an audience as my agent pitches it. So I'll be ready maybe in 2 or 3 years when a publisher might say yes. I'm I'm also working on a short story that I think is going to end up as a novella that that I'm trying to do in I think it's called a heterogeneous point of view, and with changing vocal points. So it's kind of like a really distant third person.
So now you don't see it as like on high, or?
Yeah, kind of on high.
Yeah.
I've been told that I can't use the word I can't pronounce, omniscient.
Yeah.
Right, but yeah, that's what I'm going for. And the challenge is that it's trying to get the emotions of the two main characters and how they interact without having to go into their heads, because I'm trying to maintain a certain amount of a distance to respect privacy, which is what they're really keen. They're two gay men.
That seems like binding both your hands behind your back. It seems very challenging. I mean, it seems to me the omniscient is a difference, because the omniscient area, the power of it is the promiscuity of it. You can get into any head, right? You can get into anybody's emotions, and then you can stand back and speak on high. But you're not allowing yourself access to the inner life. It's almost like that's strange. Yeah, it's strange.
Yeah, I'm trying to use the narration as a way to, I guess, to reflect on the need of some people for privacy, that they don't, the time setting is they start in the 60s, so they're very much in the closet, they never come out.
Yeah.
So,
Well, one of the things I like to I'm trying to think about in this book I'm working on is the idea of writing close to the body and body language. So if you can't get into the head of a character, then you describe how they're interacting with their environment,
right.
and what they say, right?
Yeah.
And that's what you rely on. I mean, it's kind of Mr. Obvious here, but that's where I think I would focus is, if it's a witness kind of narrator, then the witness, there's certain levels of privacy, right? If you look very carefully at somebody, you can be kind of breaking their privacy. Like, stop looking at that.
Yeah.
So how evasive is the attention of the narrator? I would say would have to be really evasive in some ways, or very curious.
Yeah.
But, yeah. I'm just riffing. I have no idea.
Well, I'll let you know if I ever succeed.
It's interesting. I like it. I like the challenge of it. Yeah.
Thank you.
And the idea of privacy and respecting privacy as kind of a kind of subject or a theme is interesting too. Yeah. And one of the things I think about personal narrative is that it's not a confession. It's not a tell-all confessional mode. It shouldn't be. It's actually a very, very private. People who are very private often take memoir on because they want to control what they say and what they show. And you don't have to say everything. You don't have to show everything. But that's a hard one to pull off too. So that sounds interesting. Let me just tell you a bit about what I'm doing, and then I'd love to you guys just ask me questions. I think that might be the best way to go forward. I wrote a series of books about this car wreck. The first book was a hybrid book. It was called Beginner's Guide to a Head-On Collision, and it was a mixture of prose and poetry and also prose poems. So kind of a mosaic of these forms, and it was about the accident and then its aftermath. And then the next book that came out was called Beyond Repair, Living in a Fractured State. And it was the short encounter. I call them encounter pieces. I was trying to get myself back out in the world, but I was struggling with PTSD. And this was 2016, 14, 15, 16. And so what I realized was that the culture around me was in PTSD mode itself. I mean, more so than usual. And I was beginning to have a hard time distinguishing between what was my trauma and what was the trauma going on around me. And I realized I had to write about the encounters I had with people and try to witness and decipher what was going on out in relation to other people so that I could try to figure out myself. And then the third book, which just came out, is called The Patient Body, a personal narrative in pieces. And it's also a bunch of shorties. As a writer friend, I read from this, and a writer came up to me and said, "Nice shorties," and I thought it's the coolest thing. And it's about kind of getting older and kind of how something like a car wreck 15 years ago still resides in your body, and how you move on from it, but you also carry it in your body, and how the body is we're all patients as we get older, right? We all become patients and doctors of ourselves, and then we're also having to learn to be patient with the body. And I also am learning more and more from listening to my body. It's a teacher, and as such somebody who lives in their head a lot, it's been quite enlightening. So the book I've been working on for the last 2 years is a different title now. I was calling it Cut for the Dog, The Art and Craft of Personal Narrative. And it's a manual, a guide of how to write personal narrative, or ideas and strategies for writing personal narrative. but I'm calling it training for the long haul now, because that's the final piece in the book. It's to be a writer, you have to be an athlete, essentially, right? You have to be in it for the long haul. You have to train like an athlete. You have to, you know, put up with a lot of failure, and you have to have, you know, what's it called when you're expecting something, gratification. You have to have very serious delayed gratification, right? You got almost all of you said, yeah, you know, in 2 years, or you know, I'm going to finish this book. You have to project it out for pretty far out in front of you and trust. My son always looked at me like, what do you do? And then he'd be like, why do you do that? You know, like he couldn't see why I would spend all this time for something that takes that long and then still may not actually be successful or get published or get read. You know, I'm like, it's a really good point. I have no idea why I do it. I'm crazy. So it's a set of essays that I've been working on Substack, which if you haven't heard of Substack, or if you don't know about it, it's something you might want to think about as a viable way to put your work out there. Some people who have big platforms, famous writers, or who are really good at this kind of stuff, make a lot of money because you can have subscribers. I'd invite you to go see mine, check mine out, but I'd invite you to go free. So you can be a free subscriber. You can get on and off without no problem. It's pretty, you just basically sign up, and my newsletter comes to you every 4 or 5 days, and then you can say, I don't like this, and you just, you know, get rid of me. Or you can sign up as a paid subscriber, and kind of like GoFundMe, you can support that writer in their work. And I'm somebody I have 340 subscribers, 34 of them are paid. So kind of small fish in this game, but I don't need to be a big fish in this game. But that said, I made about $2,000 so far, and I see it as, whenever I've been paid $2,000 to write the first 2 drafts of a book, right? Never. So I feel like it's been interesting that way, but it's also like an interesting way to have a audience kind of in real time, you know, people. And I've also started interacting with some of my heroes who are on Substack. It's incredible how generous it is. It's very unlike other social media, and there's a social media platform aspect of it too. You can write notes, and kind of like Instagram, you can kind of, you know, interact with each other. But I've started talking to a writer named Matthew Spector, who I think is really amazing, and other writers who I've always respected, Juno Diaz and Sherman Alexie, and you can just hang out with them and ask them questions. It's a very open group. So I've been writing this book on that, and now I've kind of taken most of it off it, and I'm now beginning to just revise, work on it to the point where I'm going to try to get it published next year. And it's a book about the main concept of the book is that I don't talk about revision very much, because I've come to feel like there is no, besides the proof editing and the kind of last couple rounds of kind of exactitude you have to get the book ready. I feel like revision is baked into every draft in different ways. And so the book has four sections. One is called Approaching, and I offer 5 chapters on what you kind of need to think about and how you need to orient yourself as you enter into writing a memoir or a personal narrative. And then the second set of essays is called Deepening, and these are the areas that you need to work on. Essentially, it's basically, you got to work like a fiction writer. You got to know how to write scene. You got to have characters that come off the page in 3 dimensions. You got to know how to balance scene and show and tell. You have to write encounter. You have to really, all these things, writing close to the body. And then there's a middle section, a very short piece called Cut for the Dog, that is a revision story. It's a one way of, and I can tell you it if you want me to, about how to think about revision. And then the last 2 sections, one is called restructuring, and it's about basically different mosaic collage techniques and different ways to think about how a book can be structured. You guys all seem to be thinking that way already. Different voices is one way to do it. There's a chapter called Found Forms, and it sounds like, Carol, when you talked about that concrete poem, You can do something like that in prose as well. You can pick a form like a, and poetry happens a lot. And Van Jordan, a poet, has a series of poems that are called, I call them dictionary definition poems, and where he takes a word in the dictionary and then he has one of his characters, he writes narrative poems as well, tell a story, but the story is told as threaded through the different definitions of the word, like from, and the story. So every time the story moves one step, it's using that word in the context of that specific way. And so it's this really kind of interesting way of using a form. And then the last section is called reimagining, and it's looking at ways of looking at different art forms to help you revise your work, looking at film technique, how photographs work and how you can use photographs in your writing, music, the ways you can bring music or use music in your work, and the ekphrastic, what poetry does when it looks at, you know, the poem by Keats about the Apollo, or Rilke, the famous poems, but I'm thinking about a poem by Yusef Komunyakaa about going to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall, and he writes about it and essentially writing off artwork, as a way to get into character or insight into your narrator. So that's what that book is, and I'm excited about it. It's been 2 years of hard work. Questions, thoughts? I'd love to, talk about a bunch of stuff that you guys were bringing up. I mean, Tom, one of the things I talk about memoirs, that one good way of looking at memoir is to take a period of your life or a swath of it. Don't try to write your whole life, but like look at 16 years that you spent in Japan, or if you were a swimmer all your life, write about being a swimmer, and you can get at the whole life through just that kind of swath. So I'm full of thoughts and ideas. I had one came up today I'd love to share with you, but only if we were totally struggling to have anything to say, because I have no idea if it's complete gibberish idea or not. Yeah.
Oh. I would love to hear it, but I'll start the questions and then maybe.
See, Bonnie's like, no way.
I'm gone.
No, I'm here.
I know, Bonnie, I'm sorry. Yeah.
With Substack, do you have to, I know with a blog, it's best to have a regular entries, like every week or whatever. Is that true with Substack too? Or
Yeah,
more...
but you can dictate it. You can say, this is a bi-monthly, this is once a week. Some people treat it like a live feed. It's every day,
Yeah.
I've come to give up on the once a week, and I just basically, when I got something that I think is interesting, I put it up. So I'm having more like every 3 days, 4 days. Yeah, and so you dictate it.
Good. Okay.
Yeah, and if anybody's really interested in doing it, the trick is that when you start, is you basically download your email list you create an email list out of your bigger email list, because you don't want to do this to people you don't barely know, and you invite everybody all at once. And the people who are like, oh, give me a break, they'll just opt out immediately. Most people are like, oh, it's Sebastian, I'll give it a try. And then as you go forward, a bunch of those people drop out, but then people start to come on. And then if you're in that Substack universe, people start recommending you, and you recommend other, and so you start getting people jumping on and if you advertise it in Facebook, your Facebook friends can come on. So, I grew it from 150 to 330 or so in the last year, which is considerably nothing compared to what some people do. But then again, I'm not begging for people. I'm looking for people who are interested in this niche, right? Yeah. Hope that was helpful.
Yep.
If it isn't, just pretend it is, and I won't know. Yeah. What else?
Well, I have a question. I'm not sure if it fits in here. I have completed an initial draft of a volume 1 memoir, and there's another volume out there I may never get to. And it was a lot of fun. I mean, I really enjoyed all the contrasts in my life to what it is now, what it used to be. But then, after I had finished it, I went into some old boxes and found that Mother had saved a lot of stuff. Old journals I had written in high school and college, letters I had written home from college, other things, poetry that I had written as quite young. And so I've got a bunch of different perspectives on what was such a sharp and clear memory. And I'm trying to figure out, I haven't tackled this yet, how I want to work this in. And I'm thinking, I don't want to just thread that new material into the original thing that I wrote. I'm kind of thinking about wherever there's information that really changes what my memory was, to like put it in a sidebar, not a footnote, but privilege it as a sidebar, so that the two memories eliminate each other or fight with each other, whichever.
It's an interesting idea. I like that idea. Yeah. The other way to think of it a little more, and this comes into kind of what I see as a weaving, like the weaving, like a weaving technique is, or interstitial, one of my favorite words. You know,
it's a good word.
To find, if you see the structure of the book that you've written, and then you start to kind of open it up a little bit, so that there are these kind of gaps between, maybe they're just gaps between chapters, but find the gaps in it, and then place specific texts, or these outside contrasting things, inside the work or between chapters, so the reader can kind of, I like work that does that, where you're reading a chapter, you're done, and then you get something, it's an italic, or it's a different, you just know this is not, I'm not supposed to read this the same way I'm reading the chapter, or it's a photograph, and then you look at it and take it in or read it, and then you go on to the next chapter, and there's a kind of back and forth that gets, a call and response that happens. But the sidebar idea is cool. It's kind of like a textbook or something.
Well, I got that idea from a beautiful modern edition of all things, John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. And it's a glossy, gorgeous edition. And instead of footnotes, adding new insights, new material, or elaborating on things, they handle additional material in these insets.
I like it.
And it's a beautiful book.
Yeah, that's a really cool way to think. I hope you do that.
Me too.
Tom, you said you had questions and things you were thinking about. Anything you want
to? Thank you. No, I'm trying to just take this all in right now. I don't have a particular question at the moment, but I will also add that I'm a little bit, I haven't read any of your work, and I was wondering if you had intended to share in this meeting, any short representation of your writing.
I'd be happy to. These are short pieces. If you'd like me to read one, I'd be happy to.
Well, I think that, as far as I'm concerned, would add a dimension to the discussion.
Well, I'll do that. I'll read one, and maybe it's a way to get into what you mentioned earlier about how one does flash fiction, and this is how I do flash nonfiction. Let me just grab it.
Yeah. So anyway, I hope that's
great idea, Tom.
Okay. I always need, I'm a narcissist. Yeah. I'll read whenever people want me to read, I'll read. Back to me, you know. But this is the book of this book, The Patient Body, is built in sections. It's kind of a quilt. There's a section called Young Man, and Carol kind of hinted towards it. Young man, kind of preteen, teen, husband, kind of meeting my wife in my early years of my marriage, father, and these two chapters kind of blend together, becoming a father. And there's a section called Friend. And then there's a middle section that's the kind of wild interior section. It's called The Patient Body. And these are more like poems. And there's a kind of main character called the patient body that kind of does all these things. It's a way to write about the self through a mask. It's a way to write about things that I normally wouldn't want to write about. Because that's not me, that's the patient body, you know? I'm not crazy, he is. And then there's sections, the last half of the book is neighbor, citizen, traveler, artist. So kind of all the different roles I've played, and so it's a different way of writing about the self instead of one place or a whole life or one time. It's more like the whole thing, but looked at kind of in small bits in different thematic corridors. So this is a piece called Wave, and it comes in from the neighbor section. I live in a kind of beautiful wooded suburban neighborhood, just right kind of at the edge of Asheville. And it's awful. It's called Beverly Hills because Beverly is a road that runs right through the center of it, and it's really hilly. So it's a very good name, and it's a horrible name, right? But this, I take walks every day with my dog, and this is called Wave. The boy who lives up the hill won't look at me, can't seem to look at me, at least not for more than a second before turning away. Back to his private world, I glimpse only in the fluttering of hands and the quiet words he speaks to himself, and only himself. I call out hello and wave just the same, giving him a quick smile, then looking away myself out of respect. I know what he lives with, know that I don't have access to his world and don't need to. His mom has thanked me for this ritual. He likes being outside, she says. I ask after him when I see her on her own. This new school he's going to helps, she says. He's a good boy, I say, hoping that my interest is seen less as nuisance and more as neighborly goodwill. I don't see him this evening as I stroll with the dogs down the hill. There's a little chill in the air, and the wind rustles the trees, especially the small Japanese maple that stands in their yard, as if a small squall has dropped down and brought the tree to life. As I pass by closer, I spy the boy inside the tree, sitting in amongst its nest of leaves. He's shaking the branches lightly, causing the young tree to undulate all around him. I don't call out, don't have to, just a small smile, for tonight it is he who waves to me. So, thank you. Works kind of like a narrative poem in some ways, but it's really an encounter, right? It's just a moment that I participated in, but also observed. But it tells a story of over time a little bit, right? Because I've gotten to know the mom a little bit. She's got a husband who's a little bit dangerous, like he went off to prison. He's, when he goes off his meds, he's kind of a little bit out of there. So I don't want to get too engaged with them because I don't want him to think I'm flirting with his wife or anything, and I certainly don't want to access the kid because he has his situation is he doesn't, he's really high, he's on the spectrum, and he's autistic, and so he doesn't really need me to be trying to enter into his world. But I feel like we do have a little bit of a dance together. So it's kind of talking about how one interacts with each other as neighbors. Kind of how do you find that balance of privacy and engagement? They have a dog that gets out a lot, Beauty, this crazy little pit bull, and I've found it and brought it back many a time, and brought it back into their fence and closed the fence, and they don't even know I've done that, so it's kind of it's a funny relationship. Yeah. So that's, in my mind, flash fiction or flash nonfiction is is really should just be, in my mind, focused on encounter, because the narrative voice carries so much of the novel, and the memoir. But in a short period of time, if it's all voice, there's no room for anything else. If it's all and if it's all analysis or interpretation, there's no room for hardly anything. But if it's all seen, but if you can then work on getting the information inside out, right? Giving the reader clues to who I am, what the situation is, and what the neighborhood's like through just witnessing what I've witnessed. So it's a kind of standing back from one's own, this is in memoir or personal narrative, standing back and looking at treating yourself as a character in a scene. And it's basically like writing fiction, but you're the character. And of course, as Annie Dillard put it, the most interesting memoirs, you're writing through yourself, you're not writing about yourself, right? I want to know about the 16 years you spent in Japan. I don't go in interested in you. I hope by the end I'm very interested in you and know you. But what I feel like why I want to enter that book is I want a guide that takes me into Japan, and so then that's how I see this kind of work. No one knows who I am or cares, but if they can see my relationship with this boy, they'll see something maybe in themselves, or or say that, have an opinion about it. But in a way, that moment when he was in that tree, I felt like he was saying hello to me. I thought he was waving to me, and I could be wrong, but yeah.
May I say, I really enjoyed what I saw as your restraint to not explain things. I was just very aware of that, and that really impressed me. And so
Well, thank you.
so I see it as a sense that you're telling us about now, but I really saw that, and I like that a lot, and that's something that I hope I can incorporate, because my memoir is being written, at least I think, as more in a novel fashion. It's not a serious stand back explaining things to people kind of memoir at all. It's just more of a story.
Yeah.
And that I participate in. So
yeah.
I'm very interested in everything you're saying about what you just have been saying. So it's very useful for me.
Well, thank you. I shoot for restraint. Restraint seems to me the trick.
Yeah.
That what you said about your book, I like memoirs that tell stories that read like novels. I love personal essay. I love brilliant minds and eloquent writing. So I'll read Joan Didion, or, I'll read the people who can really, who are super smart and super sentence by sentence, just, Leslie Jameson. I love that stuff, but I really get enthralled in books that bring me into their world. But yeah, restraint, yeah, I wrote poetry most of my young adulthood, and that's what I learned in poetry is that, you show more than you tell, and you capture things in their essence, and you try to use language boiled down, right? You really want to, and you want the voice of the narrator to really be pure. I think the trick, I've been thinking about memoir a lot, of course, and one of the things I think about what might be helpful to create a restraint or some kind of way of being in your writing is you really determine the point of view as soon as you can and then stick to it, or you create a bunch of different point of views too. But the point of view is really essential. Who's speaking? Where are they speaking from? Why are they speaking? Who are they speaking to? What are they? Do they have an agenda? What is their tone? The more you know that, the more you can really control how the story is told. And are you a witness? Are you a storyteller? Are you a reporter? Are you a historian? Are you, and of course, combinations of those. Are you a documentarian? Are you you know, are you secreting out lies? Are you somebody, you know, are you an investigative reporter? You know, it's kind of good to figure that out. It maybe you don't figure it out to a whole draft of work, and then you're like, oh, you know, I'm writing this because of this. Yeah. I thought I was writing about because of that.
Well, Sebastian, I keep telling Tom that he's giving us the perspective of, because I've read all this, of a stranger in a strange land.
That's a great perspective. Yes.
And it is. I mean, we're just right along beside him going, oh, I didn't know they were like that.
Yeah.
And neither does he. He's constantly being surprised by it. It's just like another aspect of Japanese culture and the Japanese mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Almost like an anthropologist, you know, a curious anthropologist. Yeah. I love travel writing for that reason too. Yeah, go ahead.
But yeah, anthropologist definitely, because that was my undergraduate major. Also, an anthropologist who is emotionally involved,
Oh yeah.
and so for me, that's the key. And I was just going to add in more in general that you know, it's a first person narrative, and so it seems to me, and I'd love to hear more about it. But first person kind of already sets you up, commits you to a certain intimacy, right? Well, it doesn't have to be, I guess, but anyhow, that's the idea I have, that you really can't escape if, you know, if it is first person.
Well, I think what I love about the difference between fiction and nonfiction is in fiction, the first person I can be really almost, and you're not so trapped by it or not so boxed in by it because you can be an unreliable narrator, right?
Yeah.
We could be dealing with the right, we could be kind of having the writer winking over the shoulder of the narrator and letting you know that this person's a psychopath and they're charming as hell and they can seduce you with what they're saying, but you have a sense because of the way it's written that I don't know if I trust this person, and I'm going to really watch what they're saying. And then it plays out, and you're like, yeah, I don't know about this person. Maybe you know, you can have these blind spots if you control it right, because the narrator is this particular kind of person. In personal narrative, you kind of Vivian Gornick says you're kind of expected to be a truth teller, honest, and you're kind of expected to be guiding the reader with no hidden agenda. And that's the cage in a way. That's the heart that can really narrow you. So one of the things that I've been noticing is that memoirists are beginning more and more to begin to say to you, they're showing that they're unreliable. You know what? I don't really remember this that well. But I know this person really well, so I'm going to kind of imagine what they're saying. You know, they're allowing themselves latitude not to be all truthful, all knowing, all remembering, you know, and kind of saying I'm fallible but I'm interesting and I'm trying to be honest. So follow me as I go along. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't claim to be reliable, but I just try to at least hope that I'm present when
Yes.
there is a difference.
That's kind of how I think about it too. I'm just trying to be present in my work.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Julia, I don't know what's going on in your mind.
Oh, I think I'm just thinking about what you're saying. I haven't done a lot of nonfiction. I've kind of played with a couple of nonfiction things, but I think I like to embed true things in stories in fiction. You know, like I take a little nugget that I stick in there, but I think I'm, you know, I mean, I have a couple of ideas for nonfiction things, but they're very revealing.
Yeah. That's
hard to be that vulnerable.
Yes, vulnerability is key. Or if you're not going to be vulnerable, you got to figure out a way for the reader to sympathize with you. If you're, like if you're not naturally forthcoming or vulnerable, you don't want to be vulnerable, but you want to tell the story that has vulnerable aspects. How do you put that across to the reader that doesn't put them off? There are ways to do it.
Yeah.
And it sounds a little bit like, Carol, what you're trying to do in this short story novellas. How do you do? What if a narrator wants to tell the story, but is respecting the privacy of the people they're talking about? Yeah.
One way I handle difficult situations in my memoir was to first determine if those situations were really important to the story that I was trying to tell.
Yeah.
And if they weren't, then I just didn't even mention it. I didn't come close to putting an idea in the reader's head about, well, I want to know more about that, because I just don't.
That's smart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I use the trick of being restrained too. Most of my writing is pretty restrained, but I think that restraint also limits my feeling of vulnerability.
Yeah.
I put out a situation and I let the reader feel what they're going to feel. I don't necessarily say, I was pulling out my hair.
Yes.
Or,
Yeah, I agree.
Well, Carol, what has always impressed me so much about your memoir, because you went through very difficult times, is that you do it without anger, without self-pity, with objectivity and solid research. And that I found really compelling, emotionally compelling. It kept me on your side.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
What she said. Now, I don't know if you guys finished right at the end, or if there's time, I can tell you my crazy idea that I came up with on as I woke up this morning.
I would love to hear it.
Uh-huh.
Sure, because otherwise, if you need to check out, you can check out. But I'm curious to hear what you guys think and help me. The BS meter. You can say, you can go. But I've been thinking a lot about anxiety tape loops. Does anybody else have the things that you run in your head, kind of something triggers it, and you got this loop? You play it. I've got like 10 of them that are like my greatest hits, and they drive me nuts. But I'm beginning to catch myself now when I start to do it. And I'm working with a trauma therapist. So I'm thinking about this idea that my first impulse is just to say, okay, no suck, I suck, stop that. I got to move on. And this therapist says, no, these are really important things to look at. What triggered it? What's at the root of it? Why are you telling yourself this story over and over again? Is there a way what's going to get you to stop telling the story? If you know the root of it, maybe you can answer to that root. If you feel abandoned by something, maybe you can tell yourself you're okay. That kind of awful, I'm okay. But it really, in the trauma, if you're traumatized, something like that really helps to have, to kind of say to yourself, I'm actually safe in this moment. I actually am loved by people. I'm not a total imposter. I'm not a total, whatever. So anyway, that's what kind of I've been working on, thinking about anxiety tape loops. And then I asked myself this morning, are memoirists, without really knowing it, and maybe even fiction writers, telling their anxiety tape loops without even knowing they're doing it? And are those getting in the way of their writing? Because if you think you're telling a true story, but it's embedded in an anxiety tape loop, speaking about, there's nothing more unreliable than that. You're saying to me, this is something that happened to me, but really this is an anxiety tape loop that is a story you've told yourself so many times that its relation to reality is very removed. It's not what you're saying it is, because you don't know that you're saying, so I wonder if there's a way to go through your work and look for these loops and see if they're in there. Well, that's one idea. And the other idea is this is the fiction writer in me, why not take an anxiety tape loop and really slow down and write it out, and maybe even start to make it be that nugget that you talked about, Julia, like take the tape loop and take an aspect of it and start writing the character off it, or start, retelling that story or recasting it. What would happen if you did that? So that's kind of what I was playing with this morning. How does it sound? Like a good idea, something to work on, or like no?
Oh, no, go for it.
Yeah.
I want to
I-
read it.
Julia, what you're going to say?
I love the idea of like the tape loop, and then it's a little bit different every time, or it incorporate, like you could do like a whole
cool.
series of short things with like this tape loop and that tape loop, and but you know how it varies it fits whatever circumstance you're in, your anxiety tape.
Yeah, the art of
Yeah, I
anxiety.
feel
Oh, I like that very much. I mean, it'd be a hard piece to read, but I like that. There's a book by a writer named Michael Martone, who's a fiction writer, and the book is called Michael Martone, and it's called Michael Martone by Michael Martone, and it's essentially a series of author's notes, and the author's note all begin the same, and they just start to digress, and they start telling different stories, and they contradict each other, and it's just one after the other after the other. And by the time you're done with it, you've gotten the kind of character, you've gotten this character, but is it him? Is it real? It's bizarre. It's metafiction, but it's really funny, and he's a good writer. But I like this idea of maybe telling it over and over again, because that is how they work, right? They're feedback loops until you catch it.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
I was just going to say, if I may, that I have, of course, my own anxiety tape loops. I think it's really struck me, but I think some of them have at least used to have a purpose, and for me, it's interesting to consider what that, let's say, a better or higher purpose originally may have been, even if it's dysfunctional at this point.
Yeah.
And but anyway, it's a great idea. I like that a lot, and I think it's something that I certainly could amplify and use at certain points in my writing. So thank you for the idea.
I think so. And the other thing I'm going to think about what you said about maybe initially, like a cliche initially isn't a cliche, right?
Yeah.
It's but a truism overused, common coin, it starts losing its value. I like that. You could use an anxiety tape loop for a character in your fiction, or your narrator, like the way you tell a dream in a book, right? You can use it in some ways to let the reader have a sense of how this character, or how you think when you're in that kind of rutted mode. It's very telling. Our anxiety tape loops, I mean, they're kind of boring. I don't think anybody would care to know mine, but we all have them, and they are. I waste about 0.5% of my waking life running tapes. I think if you've experienced a lot of trauma, tape loops are more often. They happen more often because triggers happen more often, and you're less likely to know how to respond or over respond to triggers. I've been watching a show on TV about a character who's slightly autistic, and she wears noise canceling headphones all the time. And I'm like, maybe I should start doing that. Maybe I should, because if you're open that way to things that they loud noise or things come in and you don't even know you're triggered, and then suddenly 2 hours later my wife says, what's your problem right now? Why are you acting like that? And I was like, oh, now, yeah. So
I wrote a short story that I'm not sure is all that successful. I personally love it, but it is not necessarily a anxiety loop tape, but a character that had went through a trauma, a traumatic experience, and is trying to get to the truth of that experience rather than making stuff up. So she starts with da 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 da, and then no, that's not what happened. Da 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 da. No, that's not what happened.
That's kind of what I'm talking about. That sounds really interesting. Like, yeah, to have to watch somebody in real time try to stop, slow down, and correct. You know,
Yeah.
I'm reading a book that I recommend by Melissa Febos called The Dry Season. It's an interesting book. She's a gay woman, and she's writing about, has spent most of her life kind of as a sex addict in a way, or a relationship addict. And she decides, I'm going to take a year off from sex and relationships. I'm just going to be celibate. And it's about that year. And it's so, but it's also, but it's, she's doing that. She's interrogating her own self and her own stories and her own, and she's going back and looking at all the different lovers she's had, and what, you know, how repetitive they were, and how they, and she's kind of calling her own shit, excuse my French, and seeing how much, even if you're trying to be celibate, why are you trying to be celibate? What's, you know, what's the, it's very, it's heady, and you have to like this kind of stuff, but it's really interesting.
What's the title again, please?
Dry Season. Yeah, and she's very erudite. She's looking at women in history, all the different kind of sects of women who were celibate, and looking at like Hildegard, and basically saying the reason why one of the ways that you could, back then, if you said, I'm celibate and I'm only for God, you can avoid men. You could have the freedom to be more like that yourself and have the privileges of a man if you just keep away from that world. But I'm with God. I'm married to God. It's, you know,
very powerful.
like, that's a good trick. She's like, that's a good move, you know. She was a sex worker for 4 years and a heroin addict as a young woman. So she's also looking at that and looking at what created that in her and why she did that. And it's fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds like it, yeah.
Sounds great.
Yeah, she teaches creative nonfiction at University of Iowa, and she's, you know, so she's the real deal as a writer.
Yeah. Whoa.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Well, I think I've filled your time, hopefully not wasted it. And
Thank you so much, Sebastian.